Welcome to this to the last session of this day one, and we're going to talk about internet and Africa in general. So on the panel today we have Mr. Nishal Goburdhan from PCH, Packet Clearing House. We have Brice Abba from AFRINIC. We have Michuki Mwangi from the Internet Society. So unfortunately, if you can look at the agenda, we were supposed to be with Bob Ochieng from ICANN. He couldn't come, but the panelists have enough experience as far as DNS is concerned, and they will be talking about how the global DNS is being operated globally. So in this session, we are going to talk about the evolution of the South African internet infrastructure as a way to learn as a country, as Ethiopia, what happened in South Africa, what are the things that country can learn from, or what are errors that maybe needs to be avoided. We're going to talk about internet institution and governance. We're going to talk about Africa internet institutions, and we are going to close with Michuki, who will be talking about the African interconnection economics. Okay, so without further ado, allow me to just read briefly the bio of the panelists, and then we will dive directly into the presentations. So Nishal is an internet analyst at Packet Clearing House, as I mentioned, a non-profit that exists primarily to build and support IXPs, and which has done more than 200 times over the past 20 years. Nishal is also ISPA country manager for the Internet Exchange for South Africa. Both from the technical and policy background, Nishal has been involved in the developing interconnections and internet exchange points in many countries, and now adds more those many years of experience to Africa's largest peering point. He has been CTO and Senior Project Manager, Global Infrastructure for AFRINIC, the Regional Internet Registry for Africa. Nishal started his career and has worked in several roles at the Internet Solutions. I was about to say Internet Society. South Africa's largest corporate is growing their infrastructure to a multinational service provider, operating across 4 continents during his 12-year work stint there. Nishal is passionate about transferring knowledge to developing countries. He's a long-time volunteer instructor for the AFNOG, chair of the Global NOG Alliance, and has been chair, coordinator, back-end worker for more community initiative than he can remember. On the panel as well, we have Brice Abba, Community Developer Manager at AFRINIC. He's currently working as a Community Development Manager and former Technical Trainer Team Lead at AFRINIC on the Internet-related technology. He has also helped several countries in their national IPv6 deployment plan, and instructor at WASIG. He was system administrator at MOFO identification for the automated fingerprint identification system, AFIS, in many countries, and has trained many system administrators all over Africa on how to use and maintain AFIS. He's involved in the internet community since 2006. He has been project manager at ISO Côte d'Ivoire and system administrator at the Network Information Center of Côte d'Ivoire, nic.ci, where he wrote a short paper on DNSSEC. Also, we have Michuki Mwangi. I think most of you know him. Okay. Michuki Mwangi joined Internet Society in April 2006 as a senior education manager, working with the education team to promote internet growth and sustainability in developing countries. Michuki has long been active in African and global internet communities, having been centrally involved in key infrastructure development, technical coordination activity, and policy-making forums. Before joining ISOC, Michuki was an internet technology consultant. He previously served as the administrator manager of the .ke registry for Kenya, and serves as president of the Africa Top Level Domain IFTLD Association and chief technical officer of the Kenya Internet Exchange Point, KIXP, both in a volunteer capacity. He facilitated the unicast deployment of .com, .net, F-root domain name, and J-root servers in Kenya, as well as other key infrastructure deployment in Africa. He is active in the African Network Operators Group, AFNOG, the country code name supporting organization, CCNSO of ICANN, AFRINIC, and several other local and international technology groups. Michuki has also been involved in the Internet Governance Forum discussion since the World Summit on the Information Society meeting in Tunis. Michuki holds a diploma in computer analysis and design from Data Center College, Nairobi, Kenya. He has also received additional training in scalable network infrastructure and services at AFNOG. In 2006, he was selected as ISOC Fellow to the EITF to attend the 66th ITF meeting in Montreal, Canada. And Michuki is based in Nairobi, Kenya. So without further ado, allow me to welcome Brice Abba for the introductory presentation about internet resources from Africa. With a round of applause. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon or good evening. Well, we are going to talk about internet number resources. And to do that, we are going to follow this agenda. The first thing that we'll see is why do we need internet resources? After that, we are going to see the core business of the areas. And we are going to see some statistics about the resources that we have issued IPv4 and IPv6 and autonomous system number. And we'll end by giving the context, the utopia context within the lack of IPv6 address and IPv4 address, excuse me. And we're going to give some advices and where we can go and what they can do to take the maximum of this end of the monopoly that is coming. Okay, internet is network of networks. So we have many networks interconnected on internet. And we should find a way to be able to identify each network. So to do that, we are using autonomous system number, which is one of the internet number resource that we have. So to be able to set up a network, you must have an autonomous system number. This is very important because we need to identify which your network on internet. Now, if to go further in the internet, in your network, if you zoom in your network, we can see that this computer network is made of several devices that are interconnected. And those devices need to be identified as well on internet. So to do that, we need IP address. So it can be IPv4 or IPv6 addresses. So in small words, I can say that if you want to build a network, you need IP addresses. That today we have IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, and you also need autonomous system number because your network need to be identified on internet. Now the question that we can ask is, where do we get those resources? So those resources are found to their areas. That is the regional internet registry. So those organizations are non-for-profit organizations, and their core function is to manage those number of resources for the region. So we can see North America, we have American registry and internet numbers. We have RIPE NCC for Europe with Réseau IP Network Coordination Center for Europe. We have AFRINIC for Africa, Africa Network Information Center. We have LACNIC for Latin American Network Information Center, and APNIC for Asia Pacific Network Information Center. So we have 5 areas, and if you want to get those IPv resources, you need to go to these regional antenna registry, depending on the size of the network that you want to build. Because if the size is very small, you can go to their member that we are going to discuss later on. So those areas got their resources to the central registry, which is today PTI, Public Technical Identifiers. So the central registry is going to allocate those resources, those IPv4 addresses, IPv6 addresses, blocks, and autonomous system numbers to those areas. And those areas are going to allocate and assign those numbers to their members. So we have several types of members. We have what we are calling local internet registry. So it's basically any organization that use those resources to make money, as mobile operators, internet service provider, because they need these resources to sell internet, to give internet access to the clients. So they need to, they are classified as local internet registry. We also have the NSITE. The NSITE are members that are using internet resources for the core network. If they want to get rid of NATs from the network, for instance, we have university, college, industries, banks. As soon as they want to use IP, public IPs in their system, they are classified as NSITE. And we also have another type that is called National Internet Registry. It's a type of organization within a country that is the only that can get IPs from their regional internet registry. Okay? So now the resources that have been assigned from the central registry to the different area when it comes to IPv4, most of those IPv4 resources is exhausted. So as you can see in this graph, we have the central pole since 2011, and the last one to exhaust its resource was AFRINIC. And AFRINIC enters their exhaustion phase 1 that we are calling soft landing phase 1 in April in 2017, where we're starting issue IPv4 addresses from our last /8. Okay, this to show you that today, when we're talking about IPv4, we don't have enough IPv4, and we're going to see later on what are the implications for Ethiopia that is opening its market to more ISPs and more operators. So earlier in this year, we have entered the soft landing phase 2. This means that right now, AFRINIC is issuing IPv4 address from its /11. Okay, so a big picture of what we have to is that, so you can see that most of their resources that we are having in IPv4 are almost exhausted, so we have in red everywhere. So now let's go to see some statistics. So here we have the AFRINIC has issued over 100 million of IPv4 addresses. So you can see that we have the first country that is using most of the IPs is South Africa. Okay, the second one is Egypt. And I've highlighted Egypt, Nigeria, and Ethiopia because they are the 2 countries where we have over 1,000 of 1 million of population of people. So you can see, for instance, that 100 million of. You can see, for instance, that in Egypt is using 20% of the IPv6 resources, IPv4 resources that was allocated by AFRINIC since 2005. Nigeria is using 2.71, but when you look at Ethiopia, you can see that Ethiopia is using only 3.31% of the IPs that IPs that were allocated. So does it mean that we are going to see later on what is the implication of that? So, for instance, they are going to see that internet IP is going to be shared by many people in South Africa, in Ethiopia. Compared to the other countries, we see that there is a lot of implication in the technology that you are using in Ethiopia and what are the problems linked to those technologies that you may be using in Ethiopia. In IPv6 and autonomous system number, we are still good because we are still a lot of IPv6. So It's a good, Michuki discussed about it this morning. It's a very good opportunity for Ethiopia that is building new networks to start using IPv6 because we are still good in IPv6. We still have autonomous system numbers, but as you can see, in Ethiopia, we have only 2 autonomous system numbers. You remember when I started the presentation, I said that each network on internet is identified by an autonomous system number. So this means that in Ethiopia, we have only 2 networks. That's very small for a big country like Ethiopia. And I think that this is going to change very soon. Ethiopia today has 3 AFRINIC registered members. So in Ethiopia, we have only 3 members. We have 361,000 IPv4 addresses, meaning that one IPv4 addresses is shared by over 200 people. That is very complicated. You remember that we are talking about cyber security. We want to know who is doing what on the internet. When you are sharing one IP with 200 people, it's very complicated to know who is doing what on the internet. So it's going to have an impact in the cyber security. We have 2 ISN, as I said earlier, 2 networks in Ethiopia. This is very small for a big country like Ethiopia. And we have in IPv6 only 1/32. That is very small again in a country like Ethiopia. So where do we want Ethiopia to go is to be able to register new members, because we have only 3 members in Ethiopia. This is very low. So we need Ethiopia to the organization that are coming, even university banks that want to be multi-home, and you have ISPs, mobile operators that are coming to Ethiopia. They must start their membership process, because as you can see, we saw that we have few IPv4 addresses. So even though they need to start using IPv6, but we still need some IPv4 address for the transmission technique. So it's very important for the organization that's in the organization that coming to Ethiopia to run business on internet and mobile operator. There is a need for them to start as soon as possible the membership to get IPs from AFRINIC. And we also want Ethiopia to take this opportunity of capacity building, because I think we have a huge program on capacity building. We are helping technical engineers to deploy IPv6 in the network. And we also have organizations like AFNOC that's giving also training in how to build internet, a good network and good internet. We also have organizations like Internet Society. So we have many organizations in Africa that are giving workshop trainings to engineers. So Ethiopia need to come talk to us. We are still there till Friday to see how we can take the maximum of those opportunities. Well, I'll also invite the Ethiopia technical community to be part of the big Africa technical community. So AFRINIC has several mailing lists, AFNOC, ISOC, and all those AFSCAs. These technical organizations that are working in the internet ecosystem in Africa, they have many mailing lists where you guys can subscribe. It's free, and you can discuss issues that you can have in your network. So I hope that was informative for you. I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brice. I think he gave an overview of as far as what is concerning IP resources, number resources. I think going forward to transition, I'm going to let Michuki and Nishal to talk a little bit about the name resources. So you know that for internet to work, you need numbers, but you have as well names. Something.et, Ethiopian.et, and so on and so forth. So the floor is yours. There is no specific presentation as far as it is concerned, but probably Nishal and Michuki can take us through the names, the domain names resources. Thank you.
Salam Nu. Did I get it right? Fantastic. The only other word I know is Bunna, for obvious reasons. So we're going to try to fill in a little bit of information about the role of the domain name system and how that works. Bob, who was meant to do here, was meant to talk to you about that and about ICANN and its governance structures, and of course the DNS. But we don't have his material, so we're just going to ad lib. I apologize if we don't sound all that coherent. Brice provided you an explanation of how the numbering system works on the internet. So if you aim to connect to the internet, at some point you need to get an IP address, right? And the way that you've been getting IP addresses up until this point is that you've been going to Ethiopia Telecom, and Ethiopia Telecom, by way of its providing you access to the internet, has been giving you an IP address. If you're starting to build your own internet service providers and getting your own businesses, and you now need to go to AFRINIC and you'll get IPs from them. But what about the namespace? What about the names on the internet, like Ethiopia Telecom.et, for example? How does all of that work? So the DNS is loosely coordinated, I would say, around the DNS route, and you've heard some people mention this on. And there's this misconception about who controls the route, and that's a really good question. It's a nice corridor question that we can talk about, because I think if we start talking about it here, it's just not going to end. The short answer is that there's really that there are 13 operators that have access to the information that is in the DNS route, and it's published. There is an entity that publishes the route. It's a really complicated thing that I really don't want to get into. But the point is that the DNS route is available. It's signed, so we have cryptographic evidence that what is signed and what is presented is what it should be, and that's distributed around the internet. You might have heard this strange number that there are 13 DNS routes and that they're controlled by these 13 secret organizations around the world. All of that is nonsense, let me assure you. There are probably probably on 2,000 now, I think. There's about 2,000 DNS route servers that are spread all across the world. I know it's part of one of my jobs at PCH, to help to get a lot of this infrastructure deployed in a lot of regions. And I've done that particularly in the areas of the world that I work in the developing parts of the world. I am hoping dearly to be able to work with you as you grow your internet ecosystem, your internet infrastructure, to get one in here. And the DNS route is the start of everything. It's important because if we want to start to understand how anything ties into the internet ecosystem, like .et or Ethiopia Telecom.et, want to have fast, easy, reliable, and safe access to that. So hosting this inside your country, hosting this inside an environment that you can get to, becomes really important for the way systems, human to machine systems, machine to machine systems, how they work and how they interact. Falling directly under the DNS route are what we would call country code top-level domains like .et, and then there's generic top-level domains like .com, .net, you would have heard about, .org, isoc.org would fall under there, for example. And there's management structures that control and are responsible for all of these. I think that's really not so much worth talking about, but what is particularly interesting, I think that something that should be interesting for you, is probably .et. Now, how this works in a lot of countries is that you have a domain name. Usually you have a domain name entity in the country. It's probably a domain name regulator. In my country, we have ZEDNA, which acts as the regulator for how the domain name should work, .za. I'm from South Africa. And the regulator is made up of a whole bunch of different people. Or actually, we have a board member that's sitting here, my countrywoman who was up before me. And they're meant to provide and produce they're meant to make sure that the system, the .za system, is run for the best interests of that community. You have .et that was being run by Ethiopia Telecom, and I'm told is in the position or going to be a transition to some kind of local authority. They're supporting systems for how you, as the .et operator, can work. One of those systems I'm going to let Michuki talk about, because he's actually more conversant with it than I am, and particularly around how you can get support for how that works. So I guess the thing that I want to say is you're not out there alone trying to figure out how to make this work. There are people in the industry that are willing to help. Mitch.
Thank you, Nishal. So I'll start by providing a bit of a background around what we did in Kenya in terms of when we had to go through a process similar to what Nishal is mentioning about transitioning from one management or one model to another. So some years back, I think that was around 2002, 2003, there was a decision that the current structure of how the .ke was managed was not working to the interest and the benefit of the community. And so the community came together, created a task force, and that task force was made up of representatives from the community or the stakeholders. Victor Chalo, who has been mentioned before, was running the Kenya Education Network, which is the equivalent of Ethernet here, and he was a member agreed that to have a and agreeing on the governance structure. How are we going to run this country code top level domain name? What is the model it's going to follow, etc., etc. And at the end of 2002, we actually had an entity created called KENIC, which actually runs and manages the .ke registry to date. Now, that basically created an opportunity where now the stakeholders were able to influence. And by stakeholders, I mean the community that actually stands to benefit and gain from the well-running of the country code top-level domain. So they actually influence and come up and say, these are what we would like to see in the operations of the CCTLD. One of the things that they had an issue with is the speed at which they got domain names registered under .ke. Before, they felt it was a painful process. They wanted an automated process where I just go to a website, log in, click, a couple of clicks and types. Later, you have your domain name registered, you pay, and off you go to do your business. And that's pretty much what KENIC was actually required to do. In and above of that, there was some other mandate that KENIC was tasked to do regarding internet development and so on and so forth in the country. So, and also it was designed to do so in a sustainable way, meaning that it charges for domain names, and the proceeds that it generates from the domain registration fees goes into local internet development. And KENIC has done a couple of things. I'm sure Nishal or Henriette, you can talk to them to see what Zadna is doing in South Africa from an internet development point of view through proceeds generated from the domain name space. So, but then the question we had at that point in time was, okay, so we've done it in Kenya, we can see South Africa is successful. How about the rest of the continent? And how do they get help? How do they understand the process that is required to actually undergo a similar transition? And there were quite a number of issues. And part of the issues that many African countries have faced with their national country code top-level domain names are mostly legacy. Legacy meaning that it's how the initial, I'll say, allocation or assignment of who is responsible for running the country code top-level domain name happened. It wasn't bad, it's just that it evolved in some cases not so well. And so there was a need for that transition. So with other people in the community who are running CCTLDs, we created an organization called the African Top Level Domain Name Association, or AFTLD, which is the association of all the CCTLDs that are operating in Africa. And the role of AFTLD is to provide support to CCTLDs in Africa, but also countries that are going through processes of, it's called a redelegation process. Or so basically, AFTLD's mandate came into play. AFTLD has its annual meetings, provides capacity building to countries, support countries that are implementing DNSSEC, for instance, which is something more advanced with respect to DNS security. It provides that capacity building or support that is needed for countries to actually go through this process in a way that is acceptable to the community by getting sure that the stakeholders are discussing and going through that process in a more efficient way. And also, in addition to that, from that capacity building that is needed for stakeholders and the operators to know what is expected of them as country code top level domain name registry managers. Now, something that is very unique about Ethiopia, which was mentioned earlier by Andrew in the morning, is that you have a unique script. And so that means that in addition to .et, you can actually have the equivalent of .et in Ethiopic language, right? And for that, I'll hand over to Brice to talk a little bit about internationalized domain names.
Thank you, Michuki. So yeah, I would like to jump in it in the internationalized domain name because people tend to confuse their content in local language and international domain name. So it's very important to make the difference. So content in local, content is just what you open a website, you can read things. Eh? So what you read is the content of this given website, web page. And you can have your content in your local language. So you can write even in Amharic and or in Arabics and all. So this is the content. But internationalized domain name is the fact, the ability for you to write in the browser there, for instance, ethiopiatelecom.et, you're going to write it in your local language. So for instance, you can also chinatelecom.com or .ch, you can be able to write that in Chinese. So this is what we are calling internationalized domain name. And we cannot talk about internationalized domain name without talking about universal acceptance. So because you must be able, your browser must be able to read these specific codes that is different from ASCII code. This is what we are calling universal acceptance. So the browser that you are using must be able to also read that. If I write in Chinese, for instance, chinatelecom.ch, my browser must be able to read that. Okay, if my browser can't read that, this means that I need to work and a little bit have to be done on it. So the few words that I wanted to add in the international universal acceptance.
Maybe we should have started with this with, let me ask you a question, right? And that is, why is a domain name important? Why do you think this domain name thing is important? Now, there's the textbook answer that human beings, we like names, they're symbolic to us. That's how we think. Okay, that's the textbook answer. And of course, machines like numbers, and that's why Brice and AFRINIC do what they do, and they hand out these unique numbers. But why else are domain names important? I know why they're important to me. Let me give you a hint. My email address, my home personal email address is nishal@controlfreak.co.za. It was a birthday gift more than 15 odd years ago for my friend because he says it describes my personality. And it's the truth, by the way. When Andrew was talking earlier on today, he was talking about what we're building. We're building this network, and we're building this network to interconnect people and interconnect humans. And I was going to talk about this a little later on. But for me, the domain name is a way for you to express your individuality. Do you always want to be Mohammed@gmail.com, or do you not want to have your domain being able to be expressed in your own language? And that's the importance of the IDN, the internationalized domain name, the Amharic script. Is it Amharic script? Yeah. How do you want the next set of people to be able to interact with you, to send you email to Mohammed or Sarah whatever your name is, right? These things are not terribly difficult to create. When part of what you're meant to be doing is the people that are sitting here figuring out how do we make this internet thing work for us? Well, this is a fantastic opportunity. It's taking advantage, and you've heard this the whole day, taking advantage of your unique script that you have. You have 90+ million people that are reading this and understand this that no one else in the world has. Similar to Japan, by the way, and that's one of the reasons why the Japanese internet is so big in Japan, because who else speaks Japanese aside from a few people in Argentina? So leverage on that. Leverage on your local strengths and say, how can I make this work for us? In South Africa, the domain name business is easily worth, well, at base cost, at wholesale cost, I should say, it's easily worth about $7 million US. I was doing the math while I was figuring it out here. And I got to that number based just on the number of domain names that I know and that I looked up that have been registered. That's a potential $7 million that if you don't choose to self-identify with, you're shipping over to a developed economy elsewhere in the world, probably to the owners of the .coms or the .nets or whatever it is that you're choosing. So choose smart. Choose a local solution that can work for you and that is really easy to make work for you. Now, Michuki started talking about a few things, and one of the things that he mentioned was security. And as we get more and more people coming onto the internet, more and more people using the internet, more and more people that aren't as nuanced in the use of the internet as Greybeard here and myself, who've been doing this for a long time, how do you ensure their safety and security? You know, there's wonderful conversations that you can have around safety and security in the internet, but the thing that I want to talk about a little bit is DNSSEC and how this is something that you can control yourselves because you are in control of .et. You can use technologies like DNSSEC and DANE, which is not that difficult and not that new anymore. There's enough operational experience all over the world to start producing and providing your own version of what we take to be SSL certificates today. It's another way for you to create domestic, localized solutions that will scale and be able to provide your community with the stability and security, and that's the big thing here, the security that they're going to want when they start getting online, when they start transacting online, when they start using the M-Pesa-ish type services or whatever next generation of technologies that you are going to create. This is something you control, and that's why it's important.
So Nishal touched on something very interesting there about the value of the .za at 7 million. And I'm sure the question you're wondering is, how is that? Well, it's a component of domain registration that creates new entities or new business opportunities called registrars or domain registrars. These are people who actually go in and register domain names on behalf of others. You probably know, if you've been online for some time, companies like Two Cows. Probably, how many have heard of Two Cows? So they didn't start off as big companies. Well, they're quite big companies today. And part of their business, I mean, most of their business, all their business is under domain name registrations. And when you think about it, what is a domain name? It's a name. In and of itself, it's not quite useful unless it's attached to a service. So you have to attach it to a service, attach it to an email, attach it to a website. But who's requiring this email, this domain name, sorry? It's a business, it's an enterprise. Do they know how to set up a mail system with a domain name? Most of them don't. Do they know how to set up a website using a domain name? Most of them don't. And that's where the opportunity comes in. So you take the name, register it for them, and then package it as a service. So it's a domain name with email, with a website, with a cloud service, and so on and so forth. And so the value of the domain name moves from just a name to a product. And that product becomes what people value. So if you travel to many countries where the country code top level domain name is functional in that way, where they have an entire ecosystem behind the CCTLD or the country code top level domain name, you will see billboards from when you arrive at the airport all the way to when you get to your hotel that just say the country code. So in South Africa, you will see a lot of .co.za. I am sure in your lifetime you've received an email from someone .co.za. If you go to Kenya, but that in South Africa, that's because there are over 1 million of them. So you will see one. In Kenya, it's .ke, .co.ke. And you will see the same thing the moment you land at the airport. As you drive out to the city, there are lots of billboards advertising. And everything is under .co.ke or some .ke. And the reason that has grown is because of registrars. There are over 100 registrars in Kenya. I don't know how many there are in South Africa, but most 500. And most of these are companies that did not exist. I will tell you, I was the first sort of employee of .ke. The only registrars we had them were the 12 ISPs that were in business at the time, in 2002, 2003. Today, there are 100. The top domain registrars are none of those ISPs. No. The top registrars are companies that just focus on domain name registrations. Back to the example I mentioned of 2Cows. Because they focus, ISP's business is giving access. Domain registration is another level of expertise that anyone can focus on and develop. So I think with that, I'd like to stop here. I don't know how much more time we have because we have other slides. Do you want to add anything, Brice or Nishal? Okay.
Thank you. If there are any other questions about domain names, I think we can have those questions during the question and answer session. May I request Enoch to put Michuki's presentation before Nishal? So Michuki first and then Nishal after. He can do the transition into the internet interconnections economics.
All right, so I get to stand a little bit. So, so my presentation is about interconnection economics, and this sort of builds on to the previous discussion about internet economics and also about the DNS. So I'll start somewhere so that you can get engaged. So here's a question I have for you. How much do you think you should pay for broadband? Don't be shy. $1, 10, free? Yes? When I say free, I see a lot of smiles. $5 a month, unlimited data. So maybe I should turn that question and ask, what factors determine the cost of your broadband access? What determines that? Ethiopian Telecom? What determines? The infrastructure? Yes. Availability? The quality? Mm-hmm. The most important thing is proximity. So we are in Ethiopia, right? How much is a kilo of teff at the shop? I know the prices are going up, but 30 bill. So it allows you to make injera because the price is reasonable. Some of you may argue, but it's fairly okay. If I was in Amsterdam, I don't know whether Olaf is still in the room, how much do you think a kilo of teff would cost? Yes? Maybe 60? Maybe way more? There are no direct flights from here to Amsterdam, are there? Does Ethiopian fly to Amsterdam? It does? So if you have no direct path to Amsterdam, what if I was in Argentina? I know it flies to Sao Paulo, Ethiopian, but I don't know about Buenos Aires. It does? It does now? Okay, so I'll pick a different country where there is no direct flights from Ethiopian. What do you think the price of teff would cost? Triple, maybe more. So what do you think the cost of injera in that country? I am pretty sure there is an Ethiopian restaurant. What do you think a meal costs in those countries. An Ethiopian meal, I mean, with injera and tips and something else. Way more. Why? Proximity of theft. The further you go, the more expensive it becomes. Right? On the internet, we have the same challenge. If what you're consuming is coming from North America, what happens? It has to take a long path. So the farther it is, the more expensive it becomes. And that becomes a challenge. So in actual sense, when you understand how the network of networks that was mentioned earlier works, you will find that the ISP that is providing you connectivity is at the bottom and has to pay all these other ISPs so that it can get to the content that you're looking for. And that's exactly how the money flows. And equally, that's what it determines the cost of your access. So it becomes a virtual cycle because, well, then what happens for us to be able to get better access? Oh, well, some people will say, if you look at the economics, if we increase consumption, there is growth, there is demand for new services, you have to scale that, and the cost reduces, which is true, because on the internet side, if you are only a few people getting access to the internet and you're only buying 10 Mbps, 10 Mbps is very expensive to buy. If you buy 10 gig or 1 gig, the price sort of per meg reduces. If you get to 10 gig and 100 gig, the cost per megabit reduces, right? So think about the same way. If we were talking about theft, sending a kilo of theft to Brazil does not make economic sense. Sending a ton of theft to Brazil may make a lot of sense, even for the person who wants to distribute to the Ethiopian restaurants in Brazil, right? Isn't it? So, what are some of these proximity factors? First and foremost, the way we buy internet. We buy internet through something called internet transit, which is basically when your ISP, in this case like Ethiopian Telecom, goes and buys access from another service provider to get access to the rest of the internet. There are those service providers that are well connected, so they will enable Ethiopian Telecom or whoever your ISP is to have access to the broader internet. So it's called transit. So that service provider could be connecting others. They will make it possible for them to access, and that's how you pay for your access to get, or rather how you pay to get access to the internet. So it's by default called transit. As an enterprise, when you buy access from Ethiopian Telecom, you're buying transit. That's what we refer to it as. And then there's peering. Peering, basically, this is when the service providers realize, I have customers who are sending traffic to another network. And half the time, I was sending it to my service provider, the one who's giving me access to the globe, the larger internet. And I was paying for it. Yet I have close proximity to this other network where the traffic was actually going. So before I was taking it, paying my upstream provider to deliver that service, yet I have close proximity to this operator, and if this traffic is destined to them, I could actually exchange it with them directly. So on the internet, the operators discovered this is actually a smart thing. I don't need to pay. If you and I can agree that I will exchange traffic from my customers to your customers and vice versa, we don't need to charge each other. We can just do it. Mobile operators don't understand this very well when it comes to voice, but on the internet, when it comes to data, it works. And so this model is called peering. And peering becomes something that many ISPs aim to do, because the more you peer, the more you are influencing your proximity to to the content that your consumers want or your users want, and the better it becomes in terms of their experience, but also from a cost perspective. Because if you think about it, if at the beginning when I was buying transit, I was buying for 100%, right? Of all the traffic my customers are trying to access, I have to buy 100% through a transit network. Now let's start playing with those ratios. If 20% of it starts going to this ISP, I'm only buying capacity for, on transit for 80%, right? So I have a savings of about 20% that I'm not sending directly to the transit provider, isn't it? Yes? Have I lost anyone? As your network keeps growing and you find other networks to connect with through peering, that ratio can keep changing. It can change up to 80, even 90% of all your customers' traffic is going through a peering arrangement, and you're only buying 10% through transit. We said peering, you don't pay, right? Transit, you pay. So what happens to your economics as an internet service provider? They are favorable or not favorable? Are they good or bad? They're good, right? So in that process, it means that even your customers, the end users, can now start having the effect of the benefit of proximity. Because that benefit means that you can now give them more bandwidth for less. Right? One of the places where service providers go to peer or do peering is internet exchange points. So in a country with multiple operators, instead of each ISP building their own link to that ISP, and that ISP, which would essentially increase their operating overheads, they go to a central facility and interconnect with each other and the exchange traffic that is destined to each other. And through that process, other networks will then find an opportunity to come and connect with all the networks that they like to. So how do we resolve the proximity issues? First and foremost, think of it again. I'll go back to the TEF. If it took 4 days to get TEF from a farm to Addis, how much would the TEF cost here in Addis? Would it still be 30 birr per kilo? Or would that price go up? It will increase. So part of the challenges we have is that even at the local level, if you want to get access, if the infrastructure doesn't exist, if it's not affordable, if it's not efficient, then you will have challenges accessing it at an affordable price. So we need to resolve that terrestrial infrastructure bit. Otherwise, it just makes it expensive. We also need to build internet exchange points. I've mentioned what they are, right? So a country does require an internet exchange point. So if you look around the continent, there are many internet exchange points. Ethiopia is not there yet, but you will need one in the coming days. As you have more operators in the market, there will be a need for an internet exchange point where the networks can interconnect. Then we also need to think about cross-border, the cross-border interconnection. There's a lot of trade between Kenya and Ethiopia and other countries, not just the airline, but there's a lot of trade and e-commerce and content that you may be looking for that is available in those countries. So connecting across borders becomes important. Some content you may need may be available in your neighboring countries. So I'll give an example. You're looking for Microsoft content, Facebook content, Google content. Where is the nearest place do you think you can get it? Europe will be probably what you would think, but guess what? They have large POPs on the eastern seaboard. So you can find their infrastructure in Mombasa, Kenya, and in South Africa. So you don't have to build north. You can start going south to get access to that infrastructure, to the content rather. And so remember the whole issue about proximity, right? When you go to the submarine, the cost goes up. If there's affordable terrestrial infrastructure, then Mombasa is not too far, right? And South Africa shouldn't be too far, too expensive. Hosting infrastructure is something else that is required. Again, if the content is outside of your country, then it is expensive. So how do we host or make content available locally so that the networks can access it? We need hosting infrastructure or carrier neutral data centers. Those are some facilities that make it possible for everyone to come and host their services. It also triggers the opportunity for people to start building services that can be hosted locally. So yes, we heard in the morning about e-government. Where will they host? Dr. Ndemo said at the beginning, there was no infrastructure. So they went and hosted the open government platform in California. Right? Remember the discussion? So with hosting infrastructure, you're able to retain that in country. Again, the whole proximity discussion, if it's closer, and it becomes more affordable. And you can look at pricing across in terms of around the world, what it means to buy capacity from one city to another. It is quite expensive. The prices are coming down, but it is quite expensive. And you can only reduce this if the content that you're trying to access is locally available. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michuki, for your insights. Just one thing I just wanted to add as an example. Recently in Kigali, there was a TV station and they wanted to distribute their content over mobile phones and not TV sets. And they came to us when we were managing the internet exchange point and said, how can we distribute our content on phones? And we said, come and plug on the exchange point. And then they were amazed to look at, to see that there is an opportunity with one rack of servers, one connection to the exchange point, the ability to distribute to the whole Rwandan population. Without that exchange point, they would have replicated their infrastructure in the 3 telecom operators, one in MTN, one in Airtel, one in Tigo, because they couldn't distribute their content efficiently. So this is a nod to what Michuki was mentioning. Last presentation, we're going to hear from Nishal, who will give us a perspective from South Africa as briefly as possible in less than 15 minutes. Thank you.
That means I'm not allowed more than 10 minutes, I think. So it's always fun being the last speaker. I do have a few slides, but I promise I won't be too long. I have a lot to say on the subject. because it's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I've spent a lot of my life working about. And it's something I can't finish in 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to zoom through this really quickly so that hopefully we can have more time for conversation and discussion. And if you're coming to the drinks, which are at 5:30, maybe slightly later, then we can continue. We can happily continue this discussion then. I'd love to give you more insight into what we've done. So for us, it's been a journey. And if you know how to say that word there, or if you know how to read that, then you are already better than I am. And this journey has gone through many wonderful steps. But I always like starting with a question to the audience. And my question to you today is, how many of you have done this? How many of you have taken 2 tin cans, put a piece of string in the middle, and made a little telephone, walkie-talkie, call it what you want, and then tried to speak with your friend? Come on, hands up. How many of you have tried this when you were kids? Okay, now hold your hand up. Hold your hand up while Michuki takes a photograph of you, because I'm going to report you to the South African telecommunication services. Because if you tried this, you can put your hands down. If you tried this in South Africa in 2005, you would be breaking the law. Honestly, if you tried this with your neighbor, if he was in a different premises, you would be breaking the law. Because our Telecommunications Act forbade any kind of communications across a private boundary line. So if you and your neighbor happen to be in different premises, you know, your neighbor next door, and you handed him the other side of the can, you'd be liable for prosecution. Now, I admit I don't know anyone that did get prosecuted, thank God. But that's how bad our Telecoms Act was. And that's the kind of environment that we have come from. So I understand a lot of the problems that you would have had in your environment, and I have one piece of comfort for you. You're not alone. Many of us have lived through experiences like this. We've grown, built networks. We've succeeded even through diversity like this. And that's a large part of what I would want to talk about. Ghislain warned me. He said, Nishal, you only have 10 minutes. Try and come up with 3 messages that you can give to people. So rather than that, I want to point to something that I did a while back. I live in Johannesburg. If you don't know, Johannesburg is there, right? So this is the bottom of Africa, if you're still lost. Johannesburg is there. And Cape Town is down here. Everybody knows Cape Town because it is apparently the nice place to go to. Johannesburg's wonderful, by the way. Much better. That distance, I looked this up yesterday, is 1,262 kilometers. So, okay, if you were going to drive from Joburg to Cape Town, that's about the distance that you would drive. And that's roughly the distance that you could expect a fiber network to run, because fiber networks usually like to be next to roads because they're easy to build. We've got this fantastic thing where we actually chop off the side of the road and we put fiber in the road and cover it up again so that it is safe, right? So fiber from Joburg to Cape Town is that far. This is I pulled this out yesterday. Fiber from Cape Town to London, that's way up there, is that far. Well, actually, that's the driving distance. I couldn't figure out what the fiber distance was. So if you were able to drive from Cape Town to London, and apparently you are, that is how far you would drive. And let's, for the sake of my argument, assume that this is what the actual fiber route would be as well. Now, the fiber route obviously is going to go via the coast and around Africa, etc. So it's not a straight line, but so the fiber distance is going to be longer. Under the terms of our old regime, and I did the math first in 2007 when I was explaining this at the Rio IGF about communications. You can see, it's very simple to see, that it's much shorter to get from Johannesburg to Cape Town than it is to get from Johannesburg to Cape Town to London, because, by the way, the fiber from Johannesburg to London goes through Cape Town, because that's where the undersea cable is. If you do quick math in your head, you can see that that route is probably 1/11th the distance. So the fiber route from Johannesburg to Cape Town is 1/11th the distance of the fiber from, if it existed, from Johannesburg all the way up like this to London. What do you think the price was? This is 2007, and these are real prices, by the way. What do you think the price differential was between those routes? So do you think the fiber route for this, let's call this route A, that's 1,200 kilometers. Do you think that more expensive than that? Or was that 12,000 plus, and I didn't add it in, the additional 1,200 kilometers up to Joburg? Do you think number 2 was more expensive than number 1? I'll help you. This was cheaper. Can you believe it was 1/11th the distance, but it was 11 times. This is why I remember this example, and this is why I wanted to use it. It was 11 times the price to get fiber within our country than it was to get fiber all the way up into London. That makes no sense. Absolutely no sense. How many of you are technical people? How many of you are scientists, engineers, computer science people, coders? Most of you are, because hopefully you are not physiotherapists, because then you're at the wrong conference, right? If you are physiotherapists, my shoulder's sore, we can talk later. Why did this exist? Now, there's a very, very simple equation. Michuki was talking about it without actually saying it. Speed times distance equals cost. Speed times distance equals cost. That means that if you want something really cheap, you either have to be willing to, well, lower the speed. Who here wants slower internet access? Anybody slower internet access than what you have? Yeah? No? No? Any of your clients want slower internet access? Well, no, so we can't touch the speed. If we can't touch the speed, the only other variable that we can change is distance. And that's what Michuki's been trying to tell you, that if you want to have cheaper internet access, try to reduce that distance to the content where you're going. So how then do you explain this? If speed times distance equals cost, how is this so ridiculously expensive? Something here is not wrong. And the thing that is not wrong is back in 2007, you could still only get services like this through one operator. Technically, it was 2. The second one doesn't count for a whole variety of reasons I can tell you about after we've had a beer. But because we had constrained access to fiber, because this part of the fiber, the short part, was only available through one operator in our country, really, they could charge us what they wanted. This part, there were multiple service providers that could provide us with access on the, the West Coast. So we could get it much cheaper than what you might have imagined, and that's why the cost differential was there. How did that get fixed? Well, with one simple word, we got competition. So Ghislain said, hurry this up, give them 3 things. The first C that I want to talk to you about is competition. Competition is going to be probably the single best element that you can hope for, and the single best element that you can hope to build to get effective pricing, to get effective services out of your internet infrastructure. So whatever regime is coming next, whatever policy regime, whatever infrastructure regime is being built, competition is the element that you want to ensure is going to be there to drive down your costs. There's a paper by the OECD that says the optimal number for operators in a country the size of Ethiopia, South Africa, Ethiopia, is 4 operators. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, and I don't know if necessarily you need 4. I would think that that's probably not a bad option, 3 to 4. But 4 is what they say, what they suggest. Differential services that's going to be able to drive down your costs. Now, to borrow a phrase from my countrywoman a little earlier on, when we build this technology, we go forward, and then we take 2 steps forward, and 1 step forward and 2 steps back, sorry. And that's exactly what we did under competition. Because when we embraced newer technologies like DSL, we all went crazy when DSL launched, because suddenly we went from 56 kilobit modems to 512 kilobit circuits at home. But because we were in a very poor competitive environment, at least in the market. What the incumbent did when they moved us forward into DSL was they actually centralized the internet in my country. So if you were getting internet access via DSL, everything was coming out of Johannesburg. Imagine if you were in Cape Town, and imagine if you were communicating with another network in Cape Town. All of your traffic was being backhauled to Johannesburg, gone through the service provider there, and then gone back all the way. And there are tons more examples I can give you about how the lack of an effective competitor, at least from a DSL perspective, didn't help us grow or didn't help us become the networks that we wanted to be. That's being fixed now, thank God. It's being fixed not because we fixed DSL, that's still broken, that's horribly broken, but it's been fixed because of new and better technologies. Now, as we start to roll out fiber to the home, as we start to see more localized networks, and this for me is the important thing, and this for me is a takeaway for you in Ethiopia. The way I see a big part of your networks that are going to come online are going to be probably what Michuki would call community-run networks. That is a network that's going to exist inside, let's call it a township, inside a suburb, and it's going to feed those suburbs. Those kinds of localized networks are going to, hopefully, breed localized ISPs. Not one behemoth internet service provider that's going to necessarily want to backhaul traffic to centralized positions, make the internet worse for its users. So I'm positive that with better competition comes better technology solutions and better internet access for everyone. Don't worry about reading that. That's not really there necessarily for you supposed to read, but it's an old newspaper clipping. Anyone remember newspapers? Something else, a relic from the past? That is an old newspaper clipping from 1998. And that newspaper clipping is talking about an investment that the Internet Service Providers Association made to improve infrastructure at that thing Michuki was talking about a little earlier on, that thing called an Internet Exchange Point. Very, very early on, let me think, July 1996, the South Africans realized that we needed to have this domestic Internet Exchange Point. So we set up an exchange point. We called it the Johannesburg Internet Exchange Point. It is still operational today. It's one of my responsibilities to keep it up and running. It's also the oldest exchange in Africa. So we've been doing this for a long time. What we saw was important for us to succeed as an internet country or an internet economy at the time was the necessity for us to collaborate. We were at the bottom of the world. If you really haven't looked at the map of South Africa, below us is just Antarctica. And I mean, as far as I know, the penguins don't really have Wi-Fi just yet. So there was no other way for us to communicate except going up. But if we continue to send all our packets up into the developed north, then it was going to continuously make our internet access slow. Remember that this is still the time of satellite. Just like what many of you here would have probably lived through in Ethiopia, we were still heavily reliant on satellite technologies. So, and even in fiber, we're so far away from at least the then internet centers of the world that sending packets 200 milliseconds away just to get changed in cyberspace to come back wasn't an effective way to run networks. I get asked by the Egyptians often, why is it that if you guys developed at almost the same rate that we did, we didn't get around to creating and developing internet exchange points in Egypt? My answer is, one of my answers to them, is that they're so close to Europe that the distance factor from Egypt to Europe is measured in tens of milliseconds. You know, it's 25 milliseconds on a bad day. And because it was so fast for them to get to content, they never considered that how do we make the internet better? Whereas people like me, control freaks like me, were constantly concerned saying, how do we improve? That want to improve, that want to collaborate is the second C that I have for you. Collaboration. Because you're not going to be able to succeed, you're not going to be able to make things work in this internet environment if you try to take it on your own, sorry. The way we fixed this is we had an industry association, we called it the Internet Service Providers Association, and the Internet Service Providers Association, or ISPA, did a lot of lobbying with the government, even in times of our bad internet regulation terms, ISPA was at the forefront, trying to fight the good fight, trying to get things done. But it also brought about a vehicle for us to do things together as a community. And that's the important part of this, that we could get together, we could share ideas, and we could build based on not just the experiences, but more importantly, the failures of others. I teach lots of classes. And one thing I always say in my classes is that only a fool learns from his mistakes. A wise man learns from a fool's mistakes. So learn from the mistakes that I guess us and other people have made. And that's what we were trying to do 20-ish years ago. Setting up communities to collaborate in, and from those communities, figure out what did work and what did not work. And that's my second C for you, collaboration. My third C, because I only have 10 minutes, is community. None of what you're trying to do is ever going to work if you don't recognize, as was said already today, that you're building this internet for people. You're not building an internet for machines. You're not building an internet for these abstract things just to communicate with each other. Well, not until the Terminators take over, and we hope that that's not going to be for a while. So in this thing that you're building, how are you engaging and how are you getting people to communicate with each other? So I took 3 photos from different events that we ran. You can see this was one of the, I don't even remember when this was. This was one of the community events that we run. You come to our meeting, we print your name and your autonomous system number on the back, and you can walk around proudly displaying who you are. This is Michuki. It doesn't show up here that well, but that's Michuki speaking at one of our events in Durban. It was Durban, wasn't it? A few years ago. This is a training session that we had. More pictures from training sessions. It's fine to have meetings like this. It's fine to have meetings like this where you bring international speakers, where you bring individuals to come and communicate and give you ideas. But it's more important to engage in your local community. The example that I like to cite from South Africa that I think would be good for you is how we run informal meetings. So the ZANOG, the South African Network Operators Group, for the past few months, we've been meeting on a casual social basis, I call it. Every couple of months, maybe every 3 months or 4 months, folks meet together in a pub because, you know, we're South African and people love to drink. So they meet in a pub or they meet in a hotel or a room like this. It's a small room. It's a casual event. It's usually about 2 hours. People have 1 or 2 drinks. There's 1 or 2 light technical talks, very, very small, very, very quick technical talks, always focused on technology, always focused on teaching people how to build and how to grow stuff to the next level. And then after that, we just leave the room open for people to collaborate and for people to communicate with each other. That keeps us going. It keeps the community working, and it keeps the community trying to understand that you can't fix everything yourself. You can't build everything yourself, and you need to be able to rely, you need to be able to build alongside even your competitor on the other side. Because here's why. Now that you start thinking about growing your internet economy, now that you start thinking, I've heard terms like internet exchange points, you're going to have to go to your bosses and you're going to have to say, oh, this exchange point thing is a good idea. We have to collaborate with our competitor. Competitor is not my fault, C word, don't worry. But when you talk about collaborations with competitors, your bosses and especially the lawyers are going to immediately shut off and say, no, this is not something that we can do. This is haram. It's not allowed. You need to explain to them, you need to be in a position to explain to them that although there are competitors, you still need to collaborate with them. And the phrase that I always like to say is that you compete at commercial levels, but you collaborate at technical levels. That's what we're doing here. We're collaborating at technical levels. We're sharing ideas. I couldn't do it all. I couldn't give you 20 years worth of experience in the 10 minutes Ghislain gave to me. But I'm happy to brain dump on you if you grab me outside, and I can tell you a lot more about what we've done. And that was community, and that's it. The 2 things that I'd like you to remember: learn from our mistakes. We thought we were isolationists. We thought that we could get stuff done. Let me tell you, South Africans are stubborn. We're stubborn and we're proud. We thought we could do a lot of stuff by ourselves. We thought we didn't want to engage in the communities around us. That's not the way to do it. That's not how you're going to build your internet. Reach out to the Kenyans, reach out to the Sudanese who are next door. I understand you already use some part of Sudan. Build your networks, build your communities, and include them. And a big thing, and we didn't have time to talk about this because I can talk about this for hours, we lacked an independent regulator. For a very, very long time, and this is probably what destroyed us in the 2000s, our regulator reported to the government, who was the primary shareholder of the incumbent. So you can understand that our regulator was not really interested in effecting any change. And I hope that as you build and grow your regulatory systems, you understand and see the need for an independent regulator. But as I said, you can always harass me outside. Thank you very much. My email is there, and we are here for questions if Ghislain allows it.
Yeah, a round of applause for Nishal and our panelists. So we're going to take some questions from the floor. I don't know where the mics are. They're around. We have 2 mics in the back, and we have this one in the middle. It works. Okay. Any question? Yes.
I think one question that was raised in the morning was the negative aspect of internet economy and so on and so on. I think maybe we would like to hear from the team in terms of some of the challenges with the DNS in terms of kind of trademarks, because we have some challenge in Ethiopia, for instance, in some of the trademark issues. How can, are these issues cropping up in Africa? What are kind of solutions and so on, so that we also see the nice, the kind of difficult side of the DNS. The domain, I mean, the domains of the DNS.
Yes, so I can certainly answer that. And this is a very good question. How do you deal with issues to do with trademark, arbitration, there's domain hijacking, and so many other negative sides to it. One of the things which I think was really useful in our case in Kenya, and I believe is the case in South Africa, is that when the CCTLD was established, it has what they call an independent dispute resolution policy. And that basically, the dispute resolution policy helps to address all these issues. It also covers issues to do with trademarks. In the policies of registering a domain name, there's a mechanism on how to deal with trademarks. So no one can just come in and register a trademark because it is protected within the CCTLD's policy. So, and that is where the consultative process of having all the stakeholders come together and say, how do we want this CCTLD to run? Developing those policies, it goes all the way to the most painful one, which is how much do we want to pay? Not just how we want it to run, like, because that's the most painful one, at least in my experience. Everyone wants it for free, but how do you sustain the operations? But also on issues as sensitive as trademark and so on and so forth. So the process needs to be built in. That way, when the registry runs, you have all those issues addressed. But arbitration will be a key component of resolving any pre-existing issues that may arise.
Okay, so I would like to add something on the arbitration. For instance, in .ci, we have to set up, excuse me, what you are now calling the naming convention. So it's very important for you also to have the naming convention. To have a kind of guidebook where you have the names that cannot be assigned, the names that you can take. For instance, nobody can come and say, I'm going to take Addis Ababa.et, for instance. So it's have to be in the naming convention, what you can assign and what you cannot assign. It's very important as well, close to the resolution.
Yeah, so the stakeholders can sit together and decide what kind of policy, what kind of names are allowed in the public domain for people to buy them, and what are the names that are restrictive so that nobody can take them, like the names of towns, rivers, mountains, religion and things like that. So the policy will be or should be decided within the community with the stakeholder. Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, I'd like the Ethiopian colleagues to ask questions, but just a question and some comments. I think, Michuki, on the domain name, the country code, so to really grow .et, and one of the things that we found, I was part of a study that looked at the domain name industry in Africa, is that guarantees of freedom of information and lack of censorship is an important aspect for growing CCTLD. So .za, one of the reasons that it has grown so much is that people don't fear that their information will be censored or that the government will close down, take their website off if they write things that criticize the government, for example. This has been similar in Kenya as well. So this is an aspect. There are some countries in Africa where governments take down websites that criticize them or that say things that they don't like. And then if you are a content creator, you're going to be much less willing to have your website at that domain if you can't trust that your content will be secure. So I don't know if you want to comment on that. And then I just wanted to comment on Nishal. I think it's true, you mustn't, you must learn from other people's mistakes, but I think you must also look forward. One of the things that regulators in Africa are trying to do, but it's difficult, is to regulate infrastructure sharing. And there are ways of doing it. By that, it means that if one company is building fiber infrastructure, the regulator can actually demand that they share the cost and that they share the use of that infrastructure with other companies. This is what Nishal described as collaborating amongst competitors sometimes, but it can be in everyone's interest. But it's difficult if you have a dominant player. So in South Africa, when we try to get the operators to share infrastructure, the previous government-owned monopoly, Telkom, said, we don't need to. Why should we share our infrastructure with anyone else? But the other thing is to also look at more, not just infrastructure sharing amongst big operators, but opportunities for small businesses, for local internet service providers. The one thing that I would really like to see in Ethiopia is that you get internet from local internet service providers, that you don't all pay big mobile companies to get your access. Because if you have local internet service providers, particularly in remote areas, they provide training, they create jobs, they can help content to be created. It gives you a stronger internet industry than if we all just rely on big MTNs, Vodacoms, the internet mobile companies from the Gulf. Let's really try and regulate and create through licensing and regulation, through infrastructure sharing, through GSM licenses, for example. Michuki can tell you more about that. We're talking about that in community networks to create a much more diverse infrastructure. And another thing you have in Ethiopia is you have a massive diaspora with investment and money that can come into the country through that diaspora. So utilize that as well.
Okay. Michuki, you mentioned something about facilities. Probably you can answer that as well. How do you encourage foreign or investments into that space?
Yes. So building on to what Henrietta has mentioned about the freedom of information, making sure that the investors or the entrepreneurs feel that if I put my content online, it's not going to go off for whatever reason, is really important in encouraging further investment. The moment someone feels that if it goes online, it's going to be shut down. And I can give you an experience from Egypt. The .eg is not a popular domain name in Egypt. It's easy to get, but it's not popular because of the fear that if you put it online, and you say something that may not be considered appropriate, it's going to go offline. So a lot of people in Egypt actually host content on other domain names and outside of Egypt for that particular fear. So that's a classic example. Another thing is the investment that the government makes on the same platform. In Kenya, all government agencies were required to get a .ke namespace and use it. They had a website, they were using email addresses. And as time went by, as mentioned earlier by Professor Ndemo, that they were collecting a huge amount of revenue from just e-government. I know the Revenue Authority one day was unhappy with the quality of services we were providing as the internet exchange point, and they said, we are losing revenue. And so they threatened us, if you do not improve the quality of service, we are going to do something about it. And we had to up our game because the government became dependent on the internet. And that encourages even more investment because people can see that there's a growing reliance on this infrastructure, on this service, and so it encourages people to invest. I mean, quite frankly, you're not going to set up a business in a place where people can't stop and people come and steal all the time. It will be a loss-making business. People don't come and people come and rob your business all the time. You'll want to do that in a place where you are assured of the safety of your investment. That's just business sense. So the same thing when it comes to investing in online services and businesses or e-commerce for that matter.
Okay. Is it possible that we have like one or two questions in Amharic? Yes, the gentleman here.
አመሰግናለሁ። የኔ ጥያቄ ሁለት ፕሬዘንተርስ ፍሮም ኬንያ እና ሳውዝ አፍሪካ ፕሮክሲሚቲ የሚለው ነገር ትንሽ የተለያየ አይነት ዴፊኒሽን የተሰጠው ይመስለኛል። ያንን ክሊር ማድረግ ቢቻል። ሌላው ምናልባት ፕራይስ ድሮፕ አለ በኢትዮ ቴሌኮም around 69% price drop is there. Now, what do you say about it? What kind of infrastructure አሁን ኢምፕሊመንት አድርገው ነው within በዚህ አጭር ጊዜ ውስጥ 69% የፕራይስ ድሮፕ ወይም የዋጋ መቀነስ ያደረጉት? It seems they are proving that the earth is moving. If proximity የሚባለው ነገር ኢሹ ከሆነ በቀረበ ቁጥር ፕራይስ ይቀንሳል ኦር በራቀ ቁጥር ፕራይስ ይጨምራል የሚለውን ነገር ትንሽ የሁለቱ ዴፊኒሽን ፍሮም ኬንያ ኤንድ ሳውዝ አፍሪካ እሱም ትንሽ ክሊር ቢሆን ገብታችኋል ሀሳቡ?
When you show that map, because of the competition on that map, although the distance between Cape Town and Johannesburg was kind of smaller relative to the distance to London, the price of that short distance was 11 times higher. But Michuki was, on the other hand, was saying that proximity actually reduces, is important for price reduction. I think the issue is there are a couple of variables in that. I think that's what he wants to know. Your perspective of distance relative, but Michuki was also saying proximity. So I think there are a couple of variables in that which you didn't see. Maybe explain that.
And then apparently there is a 69% reduction.
So, all right. So, and in addition to that, I got the question that there was some misunderstanding on the proximity.
Yeah. Then the second question was about the
69%.
The telecom operator recently reduced the price by 60%, and he wanted to know whether that was related to proximity, some sort of proximity or some kind of earth moving because of the which Nishal was talking about.
All right. So I can speak on both, and then I'll also have Nishal comment on that. So one of the things that is happening is that the international pricing from Europe to to Africa is dropping. I showed that very quickly in one of my last graphs, which is data from telegeography. The pricing is coming down. So you will see it's $19,000 thereabouts for a 10 gig circuit between Europe and Johannesburg. It was upwards of $50,000, $70,000 a couple of years ago. So that price is coming down. To Nairobi, it's about 20 something $1,000 from Europe to Mombasa. About $5, 35, sorry, and about $5 a meg out of Nairobi. What is happening is that as more capacity becomes available, more submarine cables become available, and the amount of capacity is available increases, the price starts dropping. The other thing is that we now have access to content that we previously had to go to Europe for. We're in the process of doing a study, and it will be released next month, but I can give you a hint of this. Operators we spoke to in Kenya are indicating that about 70% of the content their users are trying to access is now reachable within the country, accessible. Now, one of the things I also know is that Ethiopian Telecom is buying a lot of capacity from Safaricom just across the border, which is a Kenyan company. And if they're getting it at $5 a meg, hypothetically, across the border, it means that they are able to provide you because of proximity, because it's just going across the border, and within Kenya they can get 50 or 60% of the content they're trying to get to, or their customers are trying to get to. That tends to bring down the costs. And so it's easy for them to extend that benefit to their end users. I'm not saying this is what they did, but based on the knowledge that I have, that I know Ethiopian Telecom is buying capacity from Kenya. There's close proximity of, and when I say Kenya, there's the bandwidth cost in Kenya have significantly dropped. Data is showing around $4.5 a meg on IP transit, and also availability of a lot of CDN traffic in Kenya, which means now remember that proximity terrestrial capacity? Within Kenya, you can get anywhere between 40 to 70%, depending on the kind of consumer usage patterns within the country without having to leave. So that being the case, then it means that their access cost to the content has significantly dropped, and then they can extend that benefit to users. So I'll give an example. In Kenya, it is easy for me to have fiber access at home, 100 megabits FTTH for under $100 a month.
So if there's somebody from Ethiopia Telecom in the room, and you want to know how to drop your prices at a rate that's more than 69% and still make money, I'm actually an economist, not a computer science person. I will happily talk to you outside, because my data shows that you're not actually peering at internet exchange points in Africa. And if you were, you would be able to realize even more of the benefits that Michuki is talking about, because your cost to get to all of this stuff immediately becomes much lower, much lower. He's talking about $5 a meg IP transit. When you talk about how much does it cost to get this kind of data across an internet exchange point, you don't talk in dollars a megabit, but you talk in cents a megabit. And it's usually in the region of 5 to 10 cents a megabit across an internet exchange point. So ET, big tip, peer. By the way, you also extend other ways. For example, you extend into Sudan. It's an open secret. You buy from one of the operators there. Get to their exchange point. Because in the long term, it makes your network cheaper to operate. If it makes your network cheaper to operate, then you can pass on these savings if you want to. The other thing to consider is also that you're at a really interesting point in your history right now. You're at a point where for the first time, you have an operator that is potentially going to be challenged by another operator. So the economist in me says that this is a really, really good way for them to lock down market share. Even though you have 100% market share now, it's a way to ensure that you're going to keep that dominant market share if you continue to reduce costs. It's a way to sort of outprice the next level of operator that comes into the market. The second part of the question, I think we answered that. Yeah. Was it clear, I guess, to the person that asked the question? Is that okay? Does it make sense?
Is that okay? So a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much, Nishal, Michuki, and Brice. Let me welcome Bethel to continue the program.
Thank you, Ghislain. Brice, Michuki, and Nishal. So it's always interesting to have you on stage because you always make us understand the fundamentals in a pretty simple way. So thank you for that. So having said this, thank you to everyone to have actively participated in the different sessions today. I hope you found them interesting and informative. And for this, I think you deserve to have a little bit of fun. So we have the welcoming cocktail waiting for you outside. So please follow Howie and have some break and enjoy yourselves. Tomorrow, we'll start at 9. So I hope we see you all tomorrow morning. Have a good evening. Thank you.
And just one more thing, can you all check your pockets? Because we found a set of car keys and they're at the registration desk. Right? Thank you.